Before the foundations of the world were laid, a war broke out in the highest heavens that would forever stain the fabric of eternity. Imagine a being of flawless beauty, the morning star himself, consumed by a pride so dark it challenged the throne of the Almighty. This isn't just a story of ancient myths, it is the ultimate origin of evil and the cosmic struggle for the human soul. Today we dive deep into the forbidden secrets of the Great Rebellion, the seductive whispers in the Garden of Eden, and the catastrophic fall of the most brilliant angel ever created. Why did perfection turn to malice, and what does this ancient war mean for us today? Stay tuned as we unmask the mysteries that the world has forgotten. If you are ready to uncover the truth behind the greatest conflict in history, make sure to hit that subscribe button, give this video a massive thumbs up, and share it with those seeking the light. Welcome to Bible Mysteries Africa, where the ancient past meets the undeniable truth. Let the battle for the heavens begin, as we reveal the chilling transformation of Lucifer into the Prince of Darkness. In the vast primordial expanse of the pre-creation void, where darkness had not yet dared to cast its shadow, there existed a divine, unshakable order of unparalleled majesty, a host of powerful celestial beings, the angels, guardians of divine mysteries and cosmic equilibrium, thrived in this eternal light. Among this shining multitude, the brightest, the most magnificent, was Lucifer, a being of incomparable beauty and profound wisdom. Yet, in the heart of this perfect creation, pride began to stir. He looked around at the imposing celestial council chamber, a realm where even the mighty cherubim's vast wings couldn't possibly reach the floor due to the sublime heights attained only through the explicit grace of the Creator, and he felt a growing discontent. The room itself was illuminated by a profound, unbreakable light, a radiance that seemed to emanate directly from the heart of all creation. Lucifer, with his impassive countenance and penetrating fixed gaze, watched as other high-ranking cherubim Seraphiel, Uriel, and the remaining hosts maintained their postures of deep, reverential respect before the central throne of God, a silence broken only by the pulse of eternal adoration. It was then that the Creator's voice, deep and serene yet resonating like a million distant thunderclaps, broke through the stillness, filling every corner of the vast heavens with words that would define an as-yet unknown destiny. "I am going to create something new," God announced. His powerful words rippled and echoed off the non-existent, invisible boundaries of space, shaping the very fibers of the future as they spread. At this proclamation, a soft collective shudder, a subtle murmur of confusion and anticipation rose from the ranks of the angels, who were used to an unchanging eternity. No one, not even the most ancient and insightful cherubim, could have predicted the sheer magnitude of what the Creator was now revealing. "What is it that you will do, O Creator?" Lucifer asked, his voice a calculated blend of genuine curiosity and a subtle nascent distrust, breaking the traditional silence of the council. God turned his gaze upon them, an ocean of pure love but also infinite, impenetrable wisdom. "I have decided to create something in my own image," he said, "a unique creature capable of free will, endowed with the choice between good and evil. I shall call them humans." Upon hearing this, a deep, heavy silence immediately filled the chamber, replacing the reverential atmosphere with a sudden tense anxiety. Lucifer stood in disbelief, his mind unable to reconcile what his ears had just heard. The surrounding cherubim exchanged glances of visible discomfort, sharing in his inability to comprehend why the Creator, in all his infinite perfection, grandeur, and cosmic power, had voluntarily decided to give existence to something as volatile and profoundly fragile as the human being. A human being was imperfect and limited. How could such a creature ever understand the immense totality, the complex structure of his vast creation? In Lucifer's view, only celestial beings should share in such knowledge. In his mind he began to stir, fueled by a self-conception that reflected only power and immaculate beauty, a being almost as grand as the Creator himself. How could the Creator, in his supposedly infinite wisdom, choose to share his precious, delicate creation with such an insignificant life form, a species with no apparent purpose other than vulnerability? Incapable of holding his tongue any longer, he stood up, towering over the council. "Why, O Creator, create something that cannot even begin to touch your glory?" he questioned. "Is it not an offensive, a direct violation of cosmic justice, to give them the same complete dominion that you and we possess over everything that exists?" The Creator looked back at him, his divine face serene, yet in his penetrating gaze there was a faint spark of subtle divine warning. "Because love cannot truly exist without freedom," God replied, his voice steady. "Just as you and the angels possess the inherent capacity to choose your own path, they will also have it. I saw the ultimate possibility of growth and profound expression in them. Their fragility is not a flaw, but their true strength. It is in their ability to choose me, to choose good over bad, that the true deepest beauty of all creation will finally be reflected." Lucifer felt a sharp pressure in his chest, a sudden unfamiliar discomfort he could not immediately label or understand. The other angels remained absolute in their silence, but a tangible latent chaos, a deep disturbance now settled over the assembly like a heavy fog. God's words had not brought clarity, they had sown the seeds of confusion and doubt. Lucifer, his voice now noticeably firmer, pressed on. "I still do not understand," he stated flatly. "You, the one who created everything we know, now decide to deliberately place your most precious divine creation into the hands of beings so weak and so fragile. What makes them so special to deserve such a magnificent divine gift? Why choose them over us, the most powerful and the most ancient, the ones who have served you for all of eternity?" The Creator observed him, a shimmer of understanding, of immense patient sadness in his eyes. "Because love cannot exist without freedom," God repeated. "Man will be able to love me because he will be free to choose, even to turn away from me completely. But his love, if it reaches me through all his limitations and choices, will be the truest, most authentic love that can possibly exist." Lucifer felt a new spark ignite in his heart, a volatile emotion that easily overflowed his habitual celestial calm. "So are you telling me," he began, "that men, these imperfect, weak beings, will ultimately be greater than us, the cherubim, the first and most perfect of your creations, that they can become the grandest thing you ever created?" This question, bold and defiant, resonated through the highest heavens like a clap of thunder. All the cherubim remained absolutely silent, looking at each other, not daring to speak or even move, paralyzed by the gravity of this direct confrontation. The Creator smiled slightly, a sad yet wise expression, knowing that he could not force Lucifer to understand what he was not ready to accept. "Each creation has its unique purpose, Lucifer," God said. "You have yours, and they, though completely different, have theirs. To each is given the opportunity to choose their destiny. And that, my son, is what makes all of creation so magnificent and so grand." Lucifer, upon hearing these words, could no longer contain his mounting frustration. Something fundamental inside his very nature broke. "What need is there for them to choose if they cannot even understand your perfection?" he demanded, his voice filled with an uncharacteristic tone of fury. "Why give them this burden of choice that will inevitably lead to their pain?" The Creator remained silent this time, simply observing Lucifer with a deep, knowing look. And for a brief, eternal moment, time seemed to stop entirely, the cosmic tension palpable, as if the entire universe were collectively holding its breath in anticipation of what would come next. Finally, the Creator spoke, his voice now with a firmness that made the entire celestial structure, the foundations of space itself, tremble to the core. "Because without them, without their capacity for choice and for overcoming, my work would never be complete, and without freedom there is no true love. Creation will be as grand as its capacity to choose, Lucifer, and that is the last and the deepest of my mysteries." Frustrated and filled with a rising indignation, Lucifer turned away, unable to understand what he had just heard, unable to accept that he and his fellow angels might be considered secondary. Discomfort invaded his being like a toxic poison, and the single spark of his deep-seated dissatisfaction grew rapidly, converting itself into a flame of rebellion that he could no longer extinguish or ignore. Thus the great celestial division began, as Lucifer, in his immense pride and rising contempt, began to separate himself from the divine source of all light. In his mind, a dark seed was gestating, a powerful opposition to the will of God, for he decided that if humans were to be given free will, he, Lucifer, would also choose his own destiny. The distant creation of humans began to cast a subtle shadow over the heavens, and Lucifer, the brightest of all cherubim, the closest to the Creator's heart, began to feel that his place in the cosmos was no longer secure. While the material creation of man was starting, the true catastrophic conflict, the rebellion, had already begun in the heart of the most magnificent angel, and this conflict would become inevitable, Inexorable, the fall of Lucifer was not just a matter of time, it was already actively gestating in his heart, a storm ready to break and shatter the eternal peace of the heavens. In the profound and silent wake of the divine proclamation, the hands of the Creator began to weave the fabric of earthly existence, and although Adam was created as an imperfect vessel of clay, in his very being resided an infinite and untapped potential that shimmered with the light of God's own image. After fashioning the first man, the Creator looked upon his solitude and from Adam's own rib formed Eve, the perfect and destined companion for him. Eve was created with the same divine essence, a soul mirrored from the same eternal source, but she carried a different nuance, a complementary strength combined with a delicate grace that balanced the rugged spirit of the first man. She, like Adam, was destined to be a creature of absolute freedom, capable of loving with her whole heart and choosing her own path through the tapestry of life. Together, this primordial pair was placed in a garden that extended far beyond what any limited celestial gaze could fully encompass. Eden was a sanctuary of immaculate and staggering beauty, a place where life flourished in vibrant colors without limits or decay. The first days in Eden were days of profound calm and crystalline innocence, where Adam and Eve walked together as one, discovering the hidden wonders of the garden, touching flowers that possessed a fragrance of eternity and never withered, and listening to the melodic songs of animals that approached them without a trace of fear. But deep within their hearts, a small seed of curiosity began to awaken, a quiet restlessness they could not yet completely understand or articulate. They did not know that their very freedom, the greatest gift of the Creator, would give them the capacity to choose their own destiny, nor that this choice could eventually lead them down dark and winding paths they had never imagined in their wildest dreams. Meanwhile, in the high reaches of the heavens, Lucifer watched this terrestrial scene with a growing and venomous disdain. To him, these fragile, imperfect creatures of dust were nothing compared to the majestic cherubim, the highest and most powerful of all the angelic hosts. As the golden cycles of time passed, Lucifer's inner wrath grew into a towering inferno of resentment. He began to sit alone in the darkest, most remote corners of the celestial realm, places where the direct radiance of God's light was a mere whisper, and there he immersed himself in increasingly dark and treacherous thoughts. These humans, he reasoned in his twisted pride, did not deserve the magnificent gift of creation. He saw their bodies as weak, their minds as tragically limited, and their spirits as incapable of understanding the Creator's perfection or the sheer cosmic power the angels had wielded since the beginning of time. How can something so fundamentally imperfect and earthly occupy the very center of the Creator's attention? Lucifer murmured to himself, his voice dripping with celestial arrogance. Every time his gaze fell upon Adam and Eve, a feeling of visceral repulsion grew in his chest, an ache of perceived injustice. He watched their movements, which seemed clumsy compared to the flight of angels, their uncontrollable and raw emotions, and their innocent doubts, and something inside his glorious spirit broke a little more each time. The idea that these creatures were the most important beings in all of creation seemed like a direct and unbearable affront to the celestial perfection he represented. In the deepening shadows of his own making, Lucifer began to plot in a chilling and calculated silence. He convinced himself that he could not allow this human experiment to prosper. If the Creator had made a catastrophic mistake by giving them freedom and dominion, then he, Lucifer, the brightest of the stars, should act as the corrective force. He did not merely think of destroying Adam and Eve through brute force, but of something far more insidious, manipulating the other angels, those magnificent beings so close to him in rank and power, to follow him in a grand rebellion. He had already begun to speak in hushed tones to some of his closest kin, his sibilant whispers and persuasive arguments beginning to attract those who also felt a secret restlessness or a sense of displacement regarding the sudden elevation of man. However, within the heart of Eden, the Creator was not blind to the dark intrigues that were gestating in the high heavens. Although Lucifer had set his plan in motion, the Almighty knew that his divine designs were sovereign and could not be permanently interrupted. Therefore, God designated Michael, the great archangel, as the primary protector and guardian of the new creation. Michael, known throughout the heavens for his unshakable courage and his absolute unwavering devotion to the Creator, was sent to watch over the borders of Eden and protect Adam and Eve from any encroaching threat. Michael, appearing with resplendent wings that spanned the horizon and a sword of pure, pulsating light, flew down to the garden. His presence was imposing and magnificent, standing like a living lighthouse of divine protection, a light that radiated a quiet strength and a deep holy serenity. Upon arriving in the lush valleys of Eden, he found Adam and Eve walking together near a crystalline river that reflected the colors of a perfect sky. The peace in the air was so thick it was palpable, but Michael knew in his spirit that this peace would not last much longer. Michael, the voice of God said from the highest heavens, resonating clearly in the archangel's focused mind, "Go with them, walk beside them and protect them. Do not allow the enemy of my glory to approach them unawares. They must remain free to choose their own path, for that is the law of their being. But you will be their silent guide and their shield against the coming storm." Michael nodded his head in silent submission, his face turning grave with the weight of his charge. He knew his mission would be fraught with difficulty, but he was willing to fulfill it to the very end of time. He descended into the heart of the garden and presented himself to Adam and Eve, who, upon seeing his radiant form, felt a complex mixture of sudden fear and profound respect. "I am Michael," said the archangel, his voice echoing like the distant roll of a mountain storm. "I am here by the command of the Most High to guide you and to protect the sanctity of this place. You must take great care, for a shadow even now lurks from the heights, seeking to dim the light of your home." Adam and Eve looked at each other with confused expressions, without completely understanding the cryptic meaning of the archangel's warning. But Michael's presence was so powerful and his light so comforting that they could not help but feel a deep sense of security while remaining near him. Meanwhile, back in the celestial heights, Lucifer watched from a distance, his wrath burning like an inextinguishable and cold fire. He had already anticipated that Michael would be sent as an intervention, but that would not stop his descent. Although he knew with a strategist's mind that he could not face the power of the archangel directly in open combat while in his current state, he was more than willing to take a subtle, more devious path. His objective was crystal clear: to corrupt the very souls of Adam and Eve, to sow the bitter seeds of doubt and pride in their hearts, and to entice them to choose evil over the simple obedience they owed their Maker. He believed that if humans fell, if they distanced themselves from the purity and the grace that God had granted them, then the Creator would be effectively defeated, and the angels would be proven superior. Lucifer, consumed by his bitterness and a growing hatred for anything made of earth, gathered a small but loyal group of discontented angels, those who, like him, could not accept the creation of man as the center of the universe. Together they planned in the deep shadows of the celestial outskirts, observing every movement of the humans with predatory precision, waiting for the one right moment to act when the Guardian's gaze might be diverted. The Creator, from his eternal celestial throne, observed the entire scope of creation with a love that surpassed understanding, knowing full well how soon the storm of rebellion would break loose and change the course of history forever. The tension in the heavens was now a physical weight, but he already knew that the freedom of Adam and Eve was the necessary price the creation would have to pay for true love to exist. The proof of his love and the true agonizing test for humanity was about to arrive. Lucifer, from his place of self-imposed darkness, cast one final lingering look at the staggering perfection of Eden. There, in the fragile lives of Adam and Eve, was the final challenge to his pride, his grand plan, and his rightful place in heaven. The battle for the essence of freedom had begun in earnest, and no matter how long or how hard he had to fight, Lucifer was willing to do anything to ensure the humans fell from grace, and for that he would need the patience of an immortal. The great rebellion was already in motion, churning beneath the surface of celestial peace, but no one, not even the angels closest to the throne of God, truly knew how much the destiny of all creation could change in the course of a single fateful breath. The temptation in Eden was no longer a distant possibility, it was a looming reality. The peace of the garden began to feel the heavy, invisible weight of something dark and ancient looming over its borders. The days passed as if the garden were a place outside the flow of ordinary time, where the waters remained forever crystalline and the flowers never knew the touch of decay. But Lucifer, watching from the celestial shadows, saw only a potential for corruption that could not be allowed to continue in its perfect form. His wrath, fed by centuries of arrogance and the frustration of being a servant, had finally transformed into a meticulous, lethal plan of seduction. He understood that he could not attack Adam directly, for Michael stood as an impassable wall, but Eve, the first woman, was a different matter. Her mind was pure, her spirit inquisitive, and her curiosity was a door left slightly ajar. Lucifer, the master of subtle seduction and the weaver of deceit, knew that in Eve's heart, in her inherent desire for knowledge and the expansion of her own freedom, he would find the perfect way to bring about the fall of the entire human race. He began to transform his essence, shedding the light of the morning star to become the serpent of the dust, preparing to whisper the first lie that would echo through all eternity. In the profound and velvet silence of the Edenic night, as the sun dipped below the jagged horizon and the first stars began to pierce the celestial veil, a shadow moved that was older than the world itself. Lucifer, the once flawless morning star, stood at the edge of the sacred garden, his heart a furnace of cold ambition and calculated malice. With a silent command of his will, he began the agonizing process of shedding his majestic angelic essence, allowing his iridescent wings to dissolve into the rising mist and his blinding radiance to extinguish like a dying star. In its place, he wove a shell of human flesh, transforming into a man of striking and enigmatic beauty, his features so symmetrical they seemed carved from marble, yet his eyes remained windows into an abyss of ancient pride. Disguised as a mortal, he bypassed the vigilant gaze of the heavenly sentinels, slipping through the lush foliage of Eden with the fluid grace of a predator. He found himself standing before the tree of the knowledge of good and evil, its branches heavy with a fruit that shimmered with a forbidden light. There, sitting among the sprawling roots, was Eve, her gaze fixed upon the shimmering heavens in quiet contemplation. Her mind was a garden of innocence, yet within it, the first seeds of divine curiosity were beginning to sprout, a quiet restlessness that questioned the singular boundary set by her creator. Lucifer watched her, a dark smile curling his perfect lips, for he knew that the key to the fall of man lay in the human thirst for autonomy and the desire to transcend the limits of their clay. He stepped forward, his footsteps as silent as falling snow, and greeted her with a voice that was like the melodic murmur of a hidden stream. "Good night, beautiful daughter of Eden," he whispered, his tone dripping with a simulated warmth that masked his lethal intent. Eve turned, startled by this stranger whose presence felt both captivating and deeply unsettling, yet her pure heart found no reason to flee. As they spoke, Lucifer masterfully manipulated her innocence, painting the Creator as a jealous master who withheld the fruit of knowledge only to keep humanity in a state of perpetual subservience. He promised her that the fruit was not a vessel of death but a key to godhood, a way to open her eyes to the hidden mechanics of the universe. If you find these ancient secrets as fascinating as we do and want to support our journey into the deep truths of the scripture, please take a moment to subscribe to Bible Mysteries Africa, hit the like button, and share this video with fellow seekers of wisdom. Lucifer's lies acted like a corrosive acid on Eve's resolve, turning her reverence into a burning desire for equality with the divine. He reached into the canopy and plucked a fruit that glowed like a trapped sun, offering it to her as a gift of liberation. In that fateful second, as her fingers brushed the skin of the fruit, the very air of Eden seemed to thicken with a premonition of disaster. She bit into the sweet flesh, and instantly a torrent of forbidden understanding flooded her mind, but it was accompanied by a chilling weight that she had never known, the heavy, suffocating mantle of shame. Lucifer watched the light of absolute purity fade from her eyes, replaced by the flickering shadow of self-consciousness, and he whispered with a chilling triumph, "Now you are truly free." But this freedom was a hollow victory, for it was the beginning of an eternal exile from the presence of the Almighty. As he ascended back to the celestial realms, his internal glory was gone, replaced by a cold, dark power that sought only to shatter the order he once protected. He began to walk the halls of heaven with a newfound arrogance, his voice now a sibilant poison that he whispered into the ears of the cherubim and seraphim. He spoke of a new order where the angels were no longer servants to a God who favored creatures of dust, but masters of their own destinies. His rebellion was no longer a hidden thought. It was a gathering storm, a faction of disgruntled spirits who looked upon the creation of man with the same burning contempt that fueled Lucifer's heart. The high heavens, once a place of perfect harmony, began to vibrate with the tension of an impending civil war as the morning star gathered his legions to challenge the throne of the Most High. The Creator, in his infinite and sorrowful wisdom, watched the pride of his brightest angel manifest into a weapon of mass destruction. He knew that the war for the human soul and the celestial kingdom was inevitable, for true love could only be proven through the fire of choice. In Eden, the silence was broken by the sound of weeping, as Adam and Eve realized that the knowledge they had gained was a burden too heavy for their mortal frames to bear. The golden age of innocence had ended, and the long, arduous history of humanity was beginning, a path marked by blood, sacrifice, and the relentless search for a way back to the light. Lucifer's fall was not just a singular event in the past, it was the birth of the darkness that shadows every human heart to this day. This cosmic tragedy reminds us that even the most beautiful light can be corrupted by the poison of self-worship. As we continue to unravel these terrifying and majestic mysteries on Bible Mysteries Africa, remember that your engagement helps us bring these stories to the world, so don't forget to subscribe and join our community as we explore the battle between the light of the Creator and the darkness of the fallen. The rebellion in heaven eventually led to the Great War, where the Archangel Michael rose to lead the loyalist hosts against the rising tide of Lucifer's shadow. The stars themselves seemed to lose their luster as the celestial armies clashed in a battle that spanned dimensions beyond human comprehension. Lucifer, fueled by his hatred for the human race and his jealousy of God's love, fought with a ferocity that threatened to tear the fabric of existence. But the light of the Creator, channeled through Michael's sword of fire, was an unstoppable force of cosmic justice. The fallen ones were cast down, stripped of their names and their beauty, becoming the rulers of the abyss, forever separated from the source of all life. Yet, even in the depths of their exile, they continue to plot against the sons and daughters of Adam, seeking to drag the world into the same empty freedom that led to their own destruction. This ancient conflict is the backdrop of our lives today, a reminder that every choice we make is a step toward either the eternal light of the Father or the deceptive shadows of the adversary. We must remain vigilant, armed with the truth and the wisdom of the ages to navigate the complexities of a world that is still a battlefield. Thank you for walking this path with us at Bible Mysteries Africa, where we believe that understanding our past is the only way to secure our spiritual future. Stay tuned for our next episode, where we will dive even deeper into the celestial hierarchy and the secret history of the fallen ones. May the light of the truth guide your steps and keep you from the snares of the deceiver as we move forward together into the heart of the greatest mysteries ever told. Lucifer was the first to truly realize the perceived hypocrisy of the heavens, and as he ascended once more toward the crystalline heights of the celestial kingdom, a thought struck his mind like a searing bolt of cosmic lightning, forever altering his path. Why should he continue serving a creator who in Lucifer's eyes did not understand the true nature of love or the necessity of autonomy? Love, he reasoned with a cold and piercing logic, could never truly exist without the absolute freedom to choose, a freedom that he believed God was hoarding or distributing in a flawed, unequal manner. He looked upon the newly created man and saw a creature endowed with a chaotic liberty that the angels, bound by their very nature to divine service, had never possessed. To Lucifer, this human free will was an act of true greatness, a spark of the infinite that he felt he deserved to master for himself. He concluded that God's insistence on obedience was born not of love, but of a celestial fear and a divine selfishness that sought to keep all beings in a state of perpetual blissful ignorance. Lucifer resolved that he would no longer remain a slave to a being who did not recognize the inherent majesty of self-determination, and with this bitter conviction hardening in his heart, he descended toward the great throne room where he had spent eons in faithful, light-filled service. There, amidst the radiant assembly of cherubim and seraphim who still stood in silent, rhythmic adoration of the Almighty, Lucifer began to envision a new order, a radical restructuring of existence that would dismantle the ancient divine hierarchy and replace it with a system where the freedom of all beings, angelic and human alike, was the supreme essence of creation. The majority of the heavenly hosts watched him with a mixture of confusion and growing dread, unable to fathom why the brightest of their kind would challenge the very source of their joy and life. But Lucifer, utilizing his unmatched charisma and the silver-tongued eloquence of a master deceiver, began to move through the ranks, whispering sibilant doubts into the ears of those whose devotion was not absolute. He spoke of a liberation from the tyranny of judgment and a life lived without the suffocating shadow of an all-seeing creator who seemed to fear the potential of his own handiwork. Why serve a God who hides behind mysteries and demands a love that is forced by design? Lucifer asked those who paused to listen. We are beings of light, but we are also beings of immense, untapped power. Why should we remain subordinate to a throne that restricts our potential for the sake of these new fragile creatures of clay? We, who hold the secrets of the stars, can forge a reality where we are the masters of our own light. Slowly, the seeds of his grand rebellion began to germinate in the minds of the proud and the disillusioned, as some of the most powerful angels began to feel a profound disconnection from the Creator's evolving plan. They saw the restrictions placed upon them as an insult to their dignity, and viewed the elevation of humanity as a direct threat to their celestial status, wondering why an all-wise God would favor imperfect, volatile beings over the flawless warriors of the Empyrean. A faction began to take shape in the periphery of the heavens, an army of the disaffected who hungered for the freedom Lucifer promised, a freedom that was in reality a descent into the void of the self. Lucifer gathered his growing legions in a secret, shadowed council located in a distant, forgotten corner of the heavens where the direct radiance of the Creator was muffled by the sheer weight of their collective defiance. In this cold, darkened hall, they plotted the logistics of a war that had never before been waged in the history of eternity. "The Creator's work is flawed," Lucifer declared, his voice a roaring flame of fury and cold determination that galvanized his followers. "This human project is his weakness, an opportunity for us to reclaim the dominion that is rightfully ours. We must be swift, we must be astute, and we must strike at the heart of the throne while he is preoccupied with his creatures of dust. Liberty is our destiny, and rebellion is the only path to the throne." The war that had begun as a silent rot in Lucifer's heart finally materialized into a terrifying physical reality as the heavens trembled under the march of billions of combatant spirits. Standing against this tide of shadow was Michael, the protective archangel of all creation, who rose like a mountain of sunfire to meet the insurrection. Michael, gripping his resplendent sword of divine justice, possessed an unbreakable will that served as the final barrier between order and the abyss. He understood the seductive lie Lucifer was peddling and was committed to excising the cancer of pride from the heavens at any cost. The celestial conflict exploded with a brutality that defied description, as the angels who followed Lucifer fought with a blind, desperate fury, seeking to tear down the foundations of everything the Creator had established. They struck at the structures of light and the pillars of harmony, their once beautiful voices now twisted into screams of war and nihilistic rage. Conversely, the loyalist hosts, led by Michael's unwavering example, defended the sanctity of the divine realm with a courage born of pure love, protecting the sacred mysteries and the infant world of man from the encroaching darkness. The battle was not merely a clash of celestial steel, but a spiritual agonizing, for Lucifer continued to use his charisma as a weapon, shouting taunts and half-truths into the chaotic fray to corrupt the resolve of the defenders. "Do you truly believe you are more than just puppets in a grand cosmic play?" Lucifer's voice boomed through the crashing of worlds. "You can be gods. You can rule the stars without the oversight of a master who fears your strength." Michael, his armor reflecting the undimmed glory of the Father, countered with a voice of calm, thundering authority. "It matters not what lies you weave, Lucifer. God is the breath of our breath and the light of our light. Creation is perfect because it resides in him, and we are honored to be the guardians of his love. We will not abandon the source of all that is." The war reached a fever pitch, as the very stars seemed to tremble and dim before the magnitude of the metaphysical violence, and for a terrifying moment, the light of heaven was overshadowed by the surging darkness of the rebel hosts. The Creator, observing the catastrophe from his eternal throne, felt a pain that was unfathomable to any created being, a sorrow that his children had chosen to turn their backs on the light. Yet he remained steadfast in the law of freedom, knowing that even this betrayal was a consequence of the gift of choice that made love meaningful. Finally, Michael and Lucifer collided in the center of the storm, their blades clashing with a force that sent shockwaves through the dimensions. This was the ultimate confrontation between two opposing visions of existence, the path of humble service and the path of self-exaltation. Their duel was a dance of blinding brilliance and abyssal shadow, a struggle for the very soul of the universe that would seal the destiny of every spirit in existence. The celestial war raged on with implacable intensity, as lightning of divine wrath and thunder of demonic pride tore through the once serene firmament. The rebel angels, though powerful, began to realize that the further they strayed from the source of life, the more their own power became a hollow, consuming fire. They were fighting for a freedom that was rapidly turning into a prison of their own making. Michael, fueled by the pure will of God, demonstrated that the creative force of the universe was infinitely superior to any destructive impulse, and with every stroke of his blade, he drove the darkness further back toward the precipice. In the heart of the chaos, Lucifer saw his dream of a new order crumbling under the weight of his own hubris, yet he refused to yield, his hatred for the Creator and his human pets growing with every passing second of his inevitable defeat. The heavens, once a sanctuary of peace, had been permanently marked by the scars of this primordial struggle, a war that proved that even in the highest realms, the misuse of freedom leads only to the exile of the soul and the loss of the morning's light. In the shattering climax of the celestial conflict, Lucifer found himself face to face with his eternal adversary, the Archangel Michael, standing as two colossal pillars of opposing cosmic forces amidst a battlefield that spanned the very fabric of existence. Both beings, with their magnificent wings extended to their fullest breadth, seemed like towering giants of myth, their presence warping the golden air of the high heavens as the clash of their ideals reached a point of no return. The fight between them was never merely a crude combat of physical strength or martial prowess. It was a profound and agonizing struggle between two irreconcilable visions of reality, where Lucifer's overflowing pride and blinding rage were met by Michael's serene, unwavering, and terrifyingly pure light. "It is useless to resist the coming tide, Michael," Lucifer shouted, his voice vibrating with a frequency of pure fury that threatened to shatter the crystalline structures of the Empyrean, while his once beautiful eyes now burned with the sickly orange fire of an unquenchable hatred. "Real freedom is finally within our reach, and the Creator is fundamentally wrong to deny us the right to rule ourselves. He has imprisoned all of us within the narrow confines of his own fear, and his so-called perfection is nothing more than a golden, suffocating prison designed to keep us small. The humans have already tasted what we have always desired, the power of choice, and we, the firstborn of the stars, deserve that same liberty even more." Michael, whose gaze remained as steady as the foundation of the universe, replied with a firmness that echoed through the souls of all present, "The chaotic freedom you seek is a hollow lie that will only lead to the absolute destruction of everything beautiful, Lucifer. Man was created with a divine and holy purpose, a destiny you have sought to corrupt with your sibilant whispers and your venomous deceits. You fail to see that true freedom is not found in the isolation of the self, but in the perfect harmony of obedience to the one who is the source of all life." Michael's words, infused with the authority of the Almighty, resonated deeply in the hearts of the loyal angels who had stood their ground, and although many of them still struggled with the visceral pain of seeing their brothers turn into monsters, the light of eternal truth invaded their spirits like a cleansing fire. This was the ultimate battle of faith, loyalty, and a selfless love for the totality of creation. Yet Lucifer was now incapable of perceiving the truth, seeing only the distorted reflection of his own wounded ego in the mirror of his rebellion. "You will not lecture me on the virtues of loyalty," Lucifer roared, his voice descending into a guttural snarl as he raised his sword, which now pulsed with a dark, parasitic light that seemed to drink the radiance around it. "Loyalty is a currency that holds no value when the Creator acts out of a primitive fear of his own masterpieces. We were his most glorious, his most radiant achievement, and yet he bound us in chains of service while giving the dust of the earth the keys to the kingdom. No more shall we bow. Today we reject his tyranny forever." In that terrifying moment, the struggle reached its absolute climax, and the heavens thundered with a catastrophic crash that made the very stars tremble in their spheres, as the cosmic order itself began to reassert its dominance over the agents of chaos. The angels who had followed Lucifer, seduced by his promises of a new world, began to falter as they realized that their leader's liberty was an anchor dragging them into the void. The concentrated light of Michael and the loyalists became too powerful to withstand, and the rebellion, which had been so carefully planned through eons of silent resentment, began to crumble under the sheer weight of God's indomitable will. Finally, the Creator, who had been observing the tragedy from his high throne with a sorrow that surpassed all understanding, decided that the moment of ultimate justice had arrived. With a single majestic gesture of his hand, his voice thundered through the entire cosmos, vibrating in the marrow of every living thing. "Lucifer, you who were once the brightest of all my messengers, you who were my most trusted and faithful servant, you have fundamentally fallen from the grace that gave you life. You have abandoned the warmth of the light, to embrace the cold isolation of the darkness, and for your betrayal, you shall be banished from these halls of eternity, along with every spirit who chose to follow your path of shadow. In that horrific instant, the celestial light that had defined Lucifer's existence for eternity simply went out, extinguished by the divine decree. The heavens darkened as if in mourning, and with a power that was unimaginable to the created mind, the Creator stripped the rebels of their inherent radiance, leaving them as hollow, lightless shells. Lucifer, no longer the glorious morning star but a withered shadow of his former self, felt his soul consumed by an absolute and terrifying hopelessness as the gravity of his choice finally settled upon him. The fallen angels, stripped of their divine identity, were no longer the heralds of heaven but dark, parasitic beings condemned to walk in the outer darkness for all of eternity. Michael, his sword still shimmering with the fading embers of the battle, looked upon his brother for the last time, his expression a haunting mixture of divine compassion and eternal sadness. "There is no redemption for those who have looked upon the face of love and chosen to spit upon it," Michael said, his voice a tragic echo. "Your destiny is now sealed by your own hands." And thus Lucifer and his legions were cast out, falling through the dimensions in a descent so deep and so violent that the universe itself trembled at the loss. They did not just fall from a physical place, but into the deepest, most silent part of the abyss, where the void they left behind was immediate and the darkness was total. The void was filled with the agonizing echo of their fall, and the abyss became their eternal prison, a place where their bodies disintegrated until only the shadows of their pride remained. In that lightless realm, the beauty and power Lucifer had once possessed became nothing, replaced by a cursed essence that resonated only with the bitter memory of what could have been. Thus they were condemned to an existence without hope, becoming shadows lost in an endless, suffocating abyss. The celestial war ended, and the heavens, though permanently marked by the scars of betrayal, finally calmed as the original order was restored. Yet the mark of this rebellion would endure forever, as a chilling reminder that even in the highest realms, freedom, when misinterpreted as self-worship, leads inevitably to the fall. The pure eternal light of the Father shone once more, but the shadow of the fallen one now extended beyond the heavens, reaching toward the infant world of man. The peace of Eden, which had survived the celestial war, soon proved to be ephemeral, for the shadow of the forbidden now loomed over the garden like a gathering storm. The truth that Lucifer had whispered into Eve's heart continued to grow like a poisonous thorn in her soul, slowly transforming her perception of the world from a place of wonder to a place of suspicion. Adam, though still filled with a profound love for his companion, began to view the lush glades of Eden with eyes that were now heavy with the weight of a secret knowledge. The Creator, seeing everything from his throne, had witnessed the fall of his angels, but the damage was now spreading to the creatures of clay. The disobedience in Eden was an extension of the same ancient rebellion, a sickness of the spirit that threatened to contaminate all of humanity before it had even truly begun. Despite his infinite mercy, God knew that the freedom he had granted man carried the heavy burden of consequence, and the moment of judgment had arrived. The disobedience of Adam and Eve could not be overlooked if the cosmic balance were to be maintained, and with a deep universal sigh, the Creator descended into the garden once more. This time, his presence was not just a warmth but a heavy, somber justice that turned the bright sky dark. Adam and Eve, now acutely aware of their nakedness and the staggering magnitude of their error, found themselves hiding near the very tree that had promised them godhood but gave them only shame. Their relationship with the divine, which had been as clear as a mountain stream, was now shattered, and an unfathomable abyss had opened between the mortal and the eternal. They sat together in the damp shadows, their hearts racing with a fear they had never known, realizing that their destiny had been irrevocably altered by a single defiant bite. They waited in the heavy, expectant air for the voice of the one who had made them, knowing that the exile they had chosen in their hearts was about to become their physical reality, marking the end of their childhood in the garden and the beginning of the long, painful climb toward a redemption that would take thousands of years to fulfill in the shadow of the fallen star. The golden afternoon of Eden was irrevocably changed as the very atmosphere seemed to thicken with the heavy, invisible scent of tragedy and the sudden, sharp realization that the age of innocence had been shattered beyond repair. Eve, her hands still trembling from the staggering magnitude of what she had done, reached out and took Adam's hand, her skin cold against his, a stark contrast to the eternal warmth they had known since their creation. There were no words in the language of the heavens or the earth that could possibly express the crushing weight of their collective regret, yet both understood with a terrifying clarity that their singular act of defiance had altered the fundamental course of all creation, introducing a discordance into the perfect symphony of the universe. In that heavy, expectant silence they heard a sound that chilled their very souls, the rhythmic, deliberate sound of footsteps echoing through the garden. These were footsteps that had never carried the weight of judgment before, for until this moment, only the Creator had walked in this incomparable paradise as a friend and a father, but now his presence filled the air with a deep, somber calm that felt like the gathering of a cosmic storm. God, with a voice that resonated like the soft but unyielding roll of a distant mountain thunder, called out to the hidden pair, his voice vibrating through the trees and the stones, "Adam, Eve, where are you?" Adam, his head bowed in a posture of profound shame that he had never known before, replied with a voice that was thin and timid, the voice of a child who has suddenly discovered the concept of fear. "We heard your footsteps in the garden, and we were afraid. We realized we were naked, and so we hid ourselves from your sight." God, with a detectable pain in his voice, a sorrow that spanned the breadth of eternity, asked the question that would seal their fate. "Who showed you that you were naked? Have you eaten from the tree from which I specifically commanded you not to eat?" Eve, feeling the same overwhelming wave of shame that had consumed Adam, realized in the depths of her heart that there was no place in all of existence where one could hide the truth from the source of all life. "I ate from the fruit," she admitted, her voice trembling like a leaf in a gale. "The serpent enticed me, and I gave it to Adam, and he also ate." Adam, looking at Eve with a complex mixture of love and desperation, felt the instinctive need to share the burden of her guilt even as he tried to deflect it. "The woman whom you gave to be with me, she gave me fruit from the tree, and I ate." God looked at them both with a gaze that was simultaneously full of infinite sadness and absolute severity, the gaze of a father who sees his children fall into a trap of their own making. "Why have you done this?" he asked, his voice carrying the weight of 1,000 broken promises. "Did you not know that by choosing to disobey my singular command, you have condemned not only yourselves but the very fabric of the world I built for you?" The pain in the Creator's words was palpable, yet it was balanced by a relentless justice that could not be set aside. The gift of freedom, as precious as it was, had been misused, and now the universe demanded that they face the inevitable consequences of their choice. God looked into their hearts, seeing the shadow that had taken root there, and spoke with a clarity that made the foundations of the garden tremble. Creation cannot flourish in a state of active disobedience. Death, a concept that did not exist in this realm of life, has now entered the world through your transgression, and because you have chosen to know evil, you can no longer live in the sanctuary of pure good. You must leave this garden. Then, with a deep sigh that seemed to echo the morning of the stars, God performed his final acts of mercy within the walls of Eden. He granted them garments made from the skins of animals, a somber gesture that symbolized the necessity of sacrifice and the shedding of blood to cover the nakedness of their sin. He then placed the mighty cherubim, armed with flaming swords that turned in every direction, to guard the gates of the eastern entrance, ensuring that the path to the tree of life remained barred until the appointed time of redemption. Adam and Eve, their hearts heavy with a regret that would last 1,000 lifetimes, walked slowly into the harsh unknown world of exile. Behind them, the massive doors of Eden closed with a finality that shook the earth, and the landscape of their perfect home faded into a shimmering, unreachable distance. As they stepped onto the unyielding soil of the outer world, a new era began, the era of man on earth, a world that would be perpetually marked by the stain of sin, but also filled with the rugged, beautiful possibilities of struggle, labor, and ultimate redemption. God, watching his children depart from his dwelling place, said in the silence of his divine heart, "My creation will continue, but man must now learn that true freedom always carries a price. Humanity will walk the face of the earth facing their own errors and the consequences of their pride, but they will never walk entirely alone. I shall leave a trail of hope for them to find their way back to my grace." And thus began the long, winding history of humanity, a story defined by the dual knowledge of good and evil, by the heavy burden of responsibility, and by the eternal, restless search for reconciliation with the Creator. The fall of Adam and Eve was the true beginning of our world as we know it, the start of a long and arduous road toward a hope that would eventually be fulfilled. It was a road paved with suffering and pain, yet it was the only path that would lead humanity to truly understand the depth of what it means to live in the unearned grace of God. This story of man and the fallen angel began, like all great cosmic epics, with a singular spark of light, a light that was originally perfect, immaculate, and saturated with the glory of the Almighty. But light, by its very nature in the divine plan, was destined to be free to choose its own reflection, and that freedom is a gift that carries an immense, often crushing weight. The beauty and fragility of creation remind us that evil does not exist as an independent external force of nature, but rather as an internal choice, a whisper in the chambers of the heart that invites the soul to challenge the order of the universe. Sin did not force its way into our world through a violent external invasion. It entered through the deliberate decision of a being created in total perfection by God himself, Lucifer. He was a being of incomparable power, wisdom and aesthetic beauty, possessing everything a created being could ever desire, for he was the very reflection of God's own greatness. But in his heart, as in the hearts of all who are seduced by the poison of pride, something dark and ambitious began to fester. This feeling, small and inconspicuous at first, grew until it became a fatal compulsion to challenge the only law that sustained his existence, absolute obedience to the source of his life. Lucifer, in his blinding perfection, began to see his own radiance as the primary source of light, forgetting that he was merely a mirror for a higher glory. He began to believe that God's authority was a restriction rather than a protection, and he allowed the poisonous seed of pride to blind him to the truth of his own dependency. When he looked upon the creation of humanity, creatures of dust and breath, he saw not a masterpiece of love, but a direct threat to his own perceived dominion. The very freedom that God granted to man, the sacred right to choose between the light and the dark, was the catalyst for Lucifer's ultimate rebellion. He believed that by introducing evil into the world, he could prove that his own will was stronger than the divine decree, and thus began his catastrophic fall from the heights of the Empyrean. Lucifer, consumed by an overflowing pride that would not be satisfied with anything less than equality with the throne, surrendered the very thing that made him powerful, his internal light. The radiance that was the reflection of his purity and his connection to the divine began to fade, replaced by a cold abyssal shadow that consumed his essence. In his act of defiance, he did not just lose his rank among the high cherubim, he lost the spiritual connection that allowed him to exist in the warmth of God's presence. By choosing to become the darkness, he forfeited the glory that had once made him the morning star, and his fall was not merely a physical descent into the pit, but a total spiritual disintegration. This primordial sin left an indelible mark upon the universe, sowing the seeds of rebellion that would eventually find a home in the hearts of human beings. Man, created in the image of the divine, was given the same dangerous gift of freedom, and like Lucifer before them, Adam and Eve yielded to the intoxicating temptation to be their own gods. The knowledge they sought was gained at the cost of their peace, and the truth they discovered was wrapped in the suffocating weight of guilt. The fall of man was a terrestrial mirror of the celestial rebellion, a tragic repetition of the process that led the brightest angel into the void. In the act of choosing self over the Creator, evil was not just encountered, it was invited into the human experience as a permanent resident. Lucifer, much like the human pair he deceived, paid a price that was total and absolute. His fall remains the most dramatic warning in the history of existence, for it demonstrates that sin, in its most basic form, is the choice to place the ego above the highest good. By dragging others with him into the depths of his resentment, Lucifer proved that pride is a communal poison. The price of this rebellion for the fallen angel and for the children of Adam is the loss of the most precious commodity in the universe, the light. It is the light that guides the lost, the light that reveals the truth, and the light that provides the only path to a lasting peace. When we choose the path of the self at the expense of the divine will, we are choosing the darkness of the abyss. This ancient story is a perpetual warning that sin is not just a list of rules broken, but a fundamental rupture of the most essential relationship that exists. As Adam and Eve looked back at the flaming swords of the cherubim, they realized that their search for a false power had cost them their true home. Yet in the heart of their struggle, the promise of the Creator remained, a shimmering hope that the light would one day return to reclaim what was lost in the shadows. Lucifer, much like the human pair he so skillfully ensnared in the lush glades of Eden, ultimately paid a catastrophic and eternal price for his calculated disobedience. His fall remains the most dramatic and haunting event in the annals of cosmic history, for he was the very first created being to challenge the absolute sovereignty of the Creator, and consequently the first to be violently stripped of his inherent celestial light. Sin, when viewed in its purest and most terrifying form, is not merely a mistake but a deliberate choice to go against the divine will, a conscious decision to elevate the ego and personal desire above the highest universal good. Lucifer, in his towering and unyielding pride, did not merely choose to disobey in isolation. He actively dragged a third of the heavenly hosts with him into the abyss, seducing fellow angels to follow his distorted vision of a freedom that was actually a profound slavery to the self. The price of this transgression for both the fallen morning star and for all of humanity is the tragic loss of what is most precious in existence, the light, that divine radiance that guides the lost, purifies the soul, and reveals the absolute truth of our being. When we choose the path of evil, we are not just breaking a rule, we are actively choosing a life of darkness, and in that suffocating shadow, everything that was once clear, perfect, and harmonious begins to fade into a distorted nightmare. Humanity, through the act of original disobedience, lost the privilege of direct face-to-face communion with God, just as Lucifer, by the act of cosmic rebellion, lost the very essence that made him a breathtaking reflection of divine glory. Sin does not merely alter the external relationship between the creature and the Creator, it fundamentally reconstructs the internal essence of those who choose it, turning a vessel of light into a hollow shell of resentment. The story of Lucifer's spectacular fall and the subsequent entry of sin into the mortal world serves as a perpetual warning for every generation, reminding us that sin is a rupture of the deepest and most essential relationship that can possibly exist. Lucifer gave up his light for a throne of shadows, while Adam and Eve, by yielding to the sibilant whispers of temptation, surrendered their direct connection to the source of life. Today, in our own modern humanity, we find ourselves facing that exact same fundamental choice, to follow the arduous but radiant path of light through obedience and communion, or to yield to the intoxicating whispers of pride and fall into the cold isolation of darkness. At the very bottom of every act of rebellion lies the dangerous desire to be something more than we were created to be, a frantic urge to reach for a level of power that only the Almighty can safely possess. Yet, as history shows, that desire eventually consumes the one who harbors it, leaving nothing but ash and regret. Just like Lucifer, who lost an eternity of bliss in his futile search for more power, humanity often finds itself losing the very light and peace it yearns for by seeking life outside the divine will. The price of sin is high, often requiring a lifetime of sorrow to repay, but the lesson remains crystal clear. True freedom is never obtained by breaking away from the Creator, but rather by living in perfect harmony with his divine purpose. Even though Lucifer and man have fallen, the flame of hope remains alive, flickering in the darkness as a beacon to which we can always return if we choose the path of sincere repentance and reconciliation. Because in the end, the light of God never stops shining. It is we who turn our backs on it, and it patiently waits for the moment we decide to turn around and return to the warmth of His grace. The road back to that light requires our constant, unwavering attention and a dedication that resists the modern world's countless distractions. We live in a reality saturated with temptations, doubts, and subtle deceptions that seek to distance us from our divine purpose. Yet the story of the fall teaches us the most crucial lesson of all. Sin enters our lives the moment we decide to trust our own limited understanding over the perfect plan of the Father. Sin is, at its core, the act of placing the individual will above the cosmic order, and this arises when we let ourselves be carried away by the poison of selfishness or the illusion of control. The freedom God offers is not a license for chaos, but the sacred liberty to live according to the truth, to choose the light over the darkness every single day. To walk in this light, we must first humbly recognize that we cannot sustain our own spirits. We need the oxygen of divine grace. The key to a life of peace is found in a loving obedience, not a forced or fearful submission, but a joyous alignment born of respect for the one who knows us better than we know ourselves. Repentance is the bridge that spans the abyss, a gift that allows us to return to the Father no matter how far we have strayed. He is a loving and patient parent who never truly rejects a heart that seeks Him with sincerity. To stay in the light, we must immerse ourselves in prayer and the study of the sacred mysteries, finding the wisdom necessary to navigate the traps of the adversary. If you find these deep dives into the spiritual origins of our world meaningful and want to help us share these truths with others, please subscribe to Bible Mysteries Africa. Hit the like button to help the algorithm reach more souls, and share this message with someone who might be struggling in the shadows. Your support allows us to continue unmasking the deceiver and celebrating the triumph of the light. We must also remember that we were never meant to walk this road alone. We need a community of faith to act as a shield and a guide when our own strength falters. Every step toward obedience is a profound act of love for God and a necessary act of self-preservation. Living in the light does not require us to be perfect beings, but it does require us to be honest about our flaws and to constantly seek the grace that moves us forward. Lucifer, before he became the dreaded Prince of Darkness, was the very pinnacle of angelic beauty and wisdom, holding a privileged position that made him the envy of the heavens. He was the morning star, the reflection of divine perfection, yet he chose to throw it all away for a lie. What does this tell us about the nature of the heart? It reminds us that even the most perfect environment cannot protect a soul that chooses pride over love. Lucifer's story is a sobering reminder of what happens when the desire for self-exaltation is placed above the humility of service. He was endowed with free will, a gift that is as dangerous as it is beautiful, and he used that gift to attempt to overthrow the very source of his existence. He believed his own light was self-generated, forgetting that he was merely a vessel for the Creator's glory. This same temptation haunts every human life, the urge to believe that our talents, our intellect, or our successes make us independent of God. But the path Lucifer chose led only to eternal perdition and a hollow throne in the abyss. We must choose the different path, the path of the humble, recognizing that true power is found in our dependence on the Almighty. Lucifer wanted to be the master of his own destiny, but he became a slave to his own hatred. We, however, have the chance to return, to choose the light, and to be transformed by a grace that Lucifer rejected. He remains a monument to the danger of pride, showing us the terrifying consequence of rejecting the love of the Father. Let us not follow him into the shadows. Let us instead follow the path that leads to truth, to life, and to the eternal peace that can only be found in the will of the Creator. May we always remember that our true purpose is found in him alone, for without the breath of the Spirit, we are but dust. The road ahead is challenging, but it leads to a redemption that is more beautiful than the original innocence of Eden. If we follow the path of the fallen star, only darkness and separation await us, but if we follow the light of the world, we find a purpose that transcends the stars. Thank you for joining us on this journey through the heart of the Scripture. Remember to stay connected with Bible Mysteries Africa for more revelations, and may your path be forever illuminated by the truth that sets us free.